Okay, hello and welcome to this Walkability Challenge to Cities session. This session is for the Global Walkability Correspondence Network, and I'm really excited because this series was actually conceptualized at a Global Walkability Correspondence Network session. The idea was to come up with a series in which we actually showcase progressive but also practical things that are happening at the municipal level in cities across the world to support walkability. This is an imperative for our era and a great challenge for cities across the globe. And we really want to constructively challenge and inspire cities across the world to consider what they're doing for walkability. And with that in mind, we are creating this series to begin to feature people in municipal and national roles across the world who are working to support the development of quality pedestrian space and mobility, which is essential for sustainable urban development. Without that, we do not have sustainable cities. So walkability is a cornerstone of sustainable urbanism. And today, I'm really happy to welcome Michal Lorbiecki, who is an urban planner and pedestrian officer in Tychy, Poland, and he was an early member as well of the Global Walkability Correspondence Network. And I know from following him across social media, he's been a very busy man, initiating a lot of really great projects in his city. So we look forward to hearing about that and also hearing about this unique role of a pedestrian officer. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you, Michal, and thank you very much for kicking off this series.
Thank you very much, Annika. That was a great introduction. Really, I didn't expect that. But thank you very much for inviting me, and it's a great honor to begin our sessions of the challenges to cities. I wouldn't like to make it too long, so I decided on a few of the most important things I would like to share with you. So without further ado, I will share my screen, my presentation, and share with you whatever I see the most valuable in my role, about which I would like to tell you more. Like Annika said, I am so-called pedestrian officer. Of course, I always say so-called because it's not a formal name for this role. But my presentation is about the value of space. And this slide doesn't look like that because I didn't know how to prepare it. It looks it looks like this because I meant it to be this way, because I, as an urban planner, can see that the space, the value of the space isn't really noticed by people. Like in this slide, the space of the slide is limited, and I chose the wrong weight for different words. And of course, it should look like something like that, so it's readable and clear, and everyone can see what it is about. So I'm an urban planner, urbanist, and also an economist. I'm finishing my PhD in economics, but I'm working in a municipality, in a city hall of Tychy in Poland. I will show you where it is on a map. But I am mayor's plenipotentiary for development and coordination of development of public space for pedestrian traffic. This is why we call myself a pedestrian officer, because it's shorter and it's more like a marketing name for this role. And I would like to introduce my values, what I think about space, what I think about cities, what is the most important to me as an urban planner, as an economist, when it comes to pedestrian traffic, and not only to this, but especially to healthy cities, how cities should work. and what you're looking at is not a forest. I always show this picture and say that it's not a forest, it's a farm. It's meant to be harvested, and the only value to people who own this farm, this commercial forest, we could call it, is to harvest the wood, to get the wood from it. But at the same time, this farm, this harvest, this commercial forest is not resilient. It doesn't have the values of a typical natural forest. So I always compare that cities should be like forests. Forests should be resilient, not because they are only strong and can defend themselves from different crises, but also thanks to different differences and diversities of everything, of plants, of flora, fauna, animals, etc. And so I wouldn't like to go further into this thinking, but I hope I caught your mind with this to think about it a little bit on your own. But when we think about cities, we think about diverse cities, cities for people, for all people, for different people to live, to work, to spend time, like places of everything. So what comes up to my mind is, for example, Paris, that is really diverse and at the same time it's very dense. It's a city for everyone, for different people, for different works, different jobs, different actions. But at the same time, for decades, there is this ideology in the world of urban planning called modernist urbanism. And what you're looking at right now is also Paris. This is an idea of I could say a crazy mind, because it's an idea of it used to be an idea of reimagining Paris as it looked like, to something like that, with blocks of flats, with monofunctions. That's the thinking that changed how cities were developed for the last decades. And I think that's the main problem with our cities nowadays, that we still think that this ideology can solve a lot of problems. And with this ideology comes a car, because the ideology of modernist urbanism implemented a car into a city like a bloodstream, like our veins in our body. And of course, modernist urbanism was popular everywhere in the world. And here's the most, I think, the most important example of modernist district in Pro-Ego, which was built in 1955. And you can see that just blocks of flats, nothing else. But at the same time, only like not even 20 years later, the whole district was demolished, because it was known that modernist urbanism isn't healthy for cities. It's especially a source of a lot of social problems for people. So we can say that 1972 is a year of the end of modernist urbanism, but not really, not everywhere. even though scientists, urban planners agreed that 72 was the end of modernist urbanism and we should think differently, my city was halfway through the building. It was being built at the time. This is a picture from 1975. So you can see that the city where the construction site was ongoing, and the modernist urbanism was a key idea of how cities should work, should be built in Central and, of course, Eastern Europe. So keep that in mind, please. But at the same time, in 1978, we have a view of a typical American city, Houston. It's the Houston downtown, which you can see that there are more car parks than buildings themselves. But in 2022, the downtown is more dense, and even though we could say that, oh my God, there's only pavement, there's not enough greenery, I would say that this is better than it used to be, where there were only car parks everywhere. But that is one of the scenarios that cities can take to get more dense, develop in inner city, or they can sprawl. And we have this example of Los Angeles, the most sprawled city in the world. And we can say that almost everyone lives in a single family house. So it's a really sprawled city. Of course, it's car oriented. So this is another way of seeing modernist urbanism that was all about dividing the functions of a city to living, working, and spending time. And all the functions are connected by cars. So this is the another scenario. Okay, that was kind of a chaotic introduction of what I wanted to show you, but I hope that even though this is a topic to talk about for hours, I only wanted to give you some thoughts to think about, like with I don't know how to say it, like a seed to your minds to think about different perspective. And I'm an urban planner, and I look from a point of view of a city, like really holistic way. So it's not only about traffic, because the role of pedestrian officer might be thought as a role for a traffic engineer, for example, but I'm an urban planner and I look at it from another point of view. But going back to my city, to Tychy, as you can see, Tychy is located in southern Poland, near Katowice. That is the largest city, the regional city in my region. And the population is 120,000 about, and the area is over 81 square kilometers. And to say a few positive facts about my city, it's really going well with all the financial rankings and other stuff comparing to other cities in Poland. But the most satisfying ranking was the happiest city in Poland 2 years ago. We got the 4th place in Poland, so that's a great honor for my city. But I wouldn't like to talk too much about how amazing my city is. Of course, we can find a lot of really good pictures, and it's a really good place to live, actually. But I would like to focus on problems from the point of view of a pedestrian officer. And this is a picture from one of the social media groups, and some citizen shared this picture from his window. And there are so many positive comments about this picture that this is a beautiful view, amazing view, etc., etc. But this picture caught my eye with this, that like most of the space on this picture is for cars. It's not for people, it's for cars. And some could say that, but people drive cars, but still, you know what I mean. And I would like to share with you some of my projects that I implemented or started or coordinated as a pedestrian officer regarding all of those values that I wanted to hint on earlier. Because of course I can't change the whole city. I can't change how people live. That everyone has a car nowadays. In fact, in Tychy there are more cars than citizens actually. So this is a great challenge to city that everyone owns a car. So there are more cars than adult citizens. That's what I meant, because there are also children. But with coming up with those examples of my projects, this is one street in my city, and I especially chose a picture from winter because you can see how much space cars need to drive to go. And this Tychy is a young city. It was designed in a holistic way as a new modernistic city, and in the era when cars were really booming. Give me a moment. My dog is asking for something. Sorry, she wanted to go to the balcony. And the roads are actually too wide. They're oversized. The lanes take so much space, even more than there are in some standards for roads. So we've got more asphalt than there's actually needed, and you can see that in winter, especially when you've got this uh, when you can see that on snow that cars don't need that much space. So I came up with an idea to narrow the lanes uh, to make it safer, because safety is one of the values I would like to underline as a pedestrian officer. Of course, safety is something that everyone agrees on, but at the same time, when you ask if safety is more important or driving a car quickly, people will always choose driving a car quickly. So those are changes that have to be implemented from the upside, from the upper side to down, because people will always protest against anything that will slow them down, if you know what I mean. And in this project, I proposed to narrow the lanes so they are the correct width for cars to easily drive. So there's enough space to cars for cars to go, and you can see how much space was wasted only to pave it with asphalt. And of course, there could be space for more greenery or something else. But in here, I focused on the value of safety. Another value of wasting space I will talk about in another project, but you can see that here as well. And this project actually wasn't only about narrowing the lanes, it was also to make a slalom. I don't know if that's the correct word to use for this type of driving, but you can see that the lanes were broken into a slalom. So cars can't go really straight, and it's one way to slow the traffic down. And of course, using signs isn't enough, because we had casualties with children here, and that was one of the ways to slow cars down. Of course, with the islands in the middle, so there are just a few things to slow the traffic down. Another project was on one of the most important streets in the city. It used to be a market street, but you can see how the conditions are for pedestrians. You can see that infrastructure takes space for pedestrians, and also here the uh, the lane in white lanes, between the white lanes is for bikes. The other space, like what's left with those infrastructures, lamps and columns and everything, is for pedestrians. So we can see that pedestrians are actually more like something like a must, like the for the lowest standards needed for best pedestrians. And you can see that the lanes for cars are also oversized. You can see that they don't have to be so wide. They can be narrowed, so we can have more space for pedestrians, for bikes, for greenery and everything. And what I used to convince the mayor to do something about, it's not that pedestrians could have more space here, or we could have trees here, or we could have bike lanes. What convinced him is that we've got so oversized lanes that we have to pay for to keep them intact, that it's a waste of money, because every square meters of asphalt is valuable in terms of finances in public budget. So that was the way to convince the mayor to actually make this street better for pedestrians and everyone else than cars. So this is the design of the rebuilding of the street, the reshaping of the street. We can see that we don't take any lane from cars. We don't take any parking spot from the cars here on this distance in here, but we can make space for people, for pedestrians, for bike lanes, for greenery, and you can see that nobody loses, everyone gets something. But there is also another value on this example. I would like to move into another subject, which is the value of synergy between urban planning, the architecture here, and the function of the building, and the mobility. This building on the left used to have the bottom floor commercial with really nice glass windows with everything visible from the outside. But as you can see, it's been um,
transformed.
Yes, it's been rebuilt into a larger building, and as you can see that the architect saw the space from this view as something that the building should be cut off. It's not a public space anymore that a building could be open into, if you know what I mean. So they changed the really beautiful bottom floor from the commercial bottom floor. They changed it into a single entrance over there, because they rather cut the building off this public space, which isn't really nice for people, and place the life inside the building. And also you can see that the building is covered with advertisements, and you can see how large the advertisements are. And you probably know why they're so large, because they're not for pedestrians. They're meant to be seen by people in their cars driving. This is why they're so big. And this is how this kind of shaping the traffic for cars changes the shape of everything else around. I wanted to give a hint on this synergy between mobility, what mobility you use, and how buildings change. Of course, if there was a plaza or a pedestrian street, all the buildings would be open for people, like over here. You can see that this building is only monofunctional. It's a block of flats only for living in them. There are no commercial floors or anything else. And not so far away from the other building is exactly the same architecture. You can see this is the same architecture, but with commercial bottom floors, open for people, with gardens where people sit, where people want to drive with their bikes, with greenery, with trees. And you can see that this type of street is totally different than this type of street, because this street is only to get there and go to your room, to your flat. And here you don't have to only go there and not think about anything else. You can use the commercial services in the building. You can spend time with somebody. You can just do anything else, not only go from point A to point B, like in segregated functions. And you can see that, for example, there are many other uh, issues with that type of shaping the space. You can see that the building is being um, it's being what I want, how to say, vandalized. You can see the graffiti and everything that when people go to work, there are no eyes on the street, so the street is not safe. There are so many issues with not minding kind of mobility and functions of a building. So that is another value of what I want to focus on as a pedestrian officer, to connect what traffic engineer come up with and what urban planners in my city come up with. And there's another project. It's called School Street. And this is a view from a couple of years ago, how a street used to look in front of a school, a primary school. And you can see that Google camera caught children coming from a small bus. And you can see how much space is taken for the car lanes. You can see that car lanes are oversized here as well. And actually, this road used to be quite dangerous. So it was especially dangerous for kids. So our traffic engineers came up with narrowing the lanes, and you can see, especially right now, how much space was wasted when the road was built. You can see that with this dead mark in the middle. So they took what they did all their best. The traffic engineers did their best to slow the traffic on the street to make it safer. But at the same time, they didn't think about all the values that I would like to share as a pedestrian officer. But what I did was to focus on this place as something in front of the school. So we prepared a project called School Street, and we can see how much space children have in front of the school, and we can compare it how much space the cars have. But when we came up with this project of a school street, which was closing the street for traffic for a few hours only, we could see how much space children need. Those are all the children from the school. We were dancing. I'm among the children. I'm dancing with them on the street, and the event was about, of course, about fun, but also about pointing out that this space should be more safe and more open, and it cannot be done only by slowing the traffic down, but also by introducing people in this space. And let me show you how it looks from a more holistic way. You can see that the street divides actually a square in front of the school from the school. It's a barrier between the square and the school, and so we have this two-way road, very oversized, and at the same time we've got this really narrow sidewalk in front of the school, and that area on the road is even wider than the sidewalk itself. And of course, you cannot just go straight from the school door to the square. You have to go around and use the crossings. So it's not really intuitive to go there. And my proposal was to make this street more of a Wonerv, like a street for people, for citizens, which would be like a street in a neighborhood street where pedestrians have priority to walk on this street, and at the same time the car lane would be slalomed. I don't know how to say in English. It would go around everything else, so it would slow the traffic down. And in the hours of getting to school and getting home for the students, for children, the road would be closed. And at the same time, it would make the square more accessible for everyone to access the school straight from the square and vice versa. And there would be the square and the school would be more connected. And of course, we could place more benches and other small architecture around to make it more connected, and of course more greenery. So this is how much space we can get from oversized lanes. And the last and not least project, the most important to me right now as a mayor's plenipotentiary for designing and coordination of the new city center of my city, is actually the new city center, which was designed to be placed in here, because my city doesn't have a city center, because it has never been built. And this is the area that was dedicated to this function. And you can see that right in this place we've got a really huge road. It has 55 meters from a sidewalk to sidewalk, so it's really huge artery for cars. And at the same time, we cannot say that this place would be a good place for a city center. Who would like to spend time there, or how would this integrate our city, as right now it divides the city, it just divides everything, not only people, but also the functions and local economy and everything. But I would like to focus on the traffic and this road. It's called Jana Pawła II. In English, it would be John Paul's II Street. I would like to focus on this and give you a hint for the project of the city center with it. So this is the street I proposed to make it more like a city street. So make it more narrow and more of a public space instead of just a road, not turn the road into a street as a public space. So the most important is to make it more narrow, and at the same time we would get the land, the area to for more people-oriented spaces, not only the public spaces, but also buildings with flats, with spaces for with jobs and commercial activities. But I would like to show a different streets to with as inspirations to this project. As you can see, this is one of the streets in Milan. It has 26 meters between buildings, and you can see that there is a lot of space for different types of movements. We've got sidewalks, we've got parking spaces, we've got car lanes, we've got we've got a tram here, we've got trees and everything. So this is everything what a street needs, and it's only 23 meters. This is another picture I took in Paris. This street has 28 meters between buildings, and you can see really wide sidewalks. We've got two-way bike lanes, we've got trees, we've got bus lanes only. This free lane you can see in the picture is a bus lane, and you can see that everyone goes faster than cars here. So this is a really good example of a good city street for me. And this is a main street in Nice in France as well. And you can see how much different activities can be placed in a street that has only 24 meters between buildings. And this is the most famous street in Poland, I think. It's called Piotrkowska. It's in Łódź in central Poland, and it has 25 meters between buildings, and this is the longest, we call it a pedestrian street in Poland. Of course, it's not only for pedestrians, it's also for cars, but you can see it's dominated by people. Cars are guests here. And this is one of the first renders of my design of the city centers. This is the new Jana Pawła II street, which will have 27 meters between buildings, and it has to have place for wide sidewalks, bike lanes, trees, greenery, buses and cars, of course. So it's just one of the visualizations. And I would like to finish with the visualization of render of the whole city center that is planned for my city. And I hope it's interesting. And if you'd like, I can have this project presented on another session of our challenges. Thank you very much. I hope it wasn't too long. I tried to keep it as short as possible, but at the same time, I would like to underline the most important issues to me. So this is why it was a little bit chaotic, because I tried to quickly introduce what's important to me when as a pedestrian officer. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, of course, I'm open for discussion. And of course, you're welcome to contact me via any social media. You can easily find me, and you can also use the Linktree link here. I'm showing here on this slide. And yes, I welcome you to open a discussion. Let me just open the window for my dog to come back to the flat. Yeah, sorry for that.
Michal, can I just ask you, because I remember when I went to visit Anika at Warsaw, and I was kind of you know, I was expecting the communist legacy, but I wasn't aware of how many big avenues there were. And you know, that kind of method of the control of protest and all this kind of thing when they do the big avenues. So is that something that's happening that's around the whole country? Is it all over Poland, like the big avenues, and is that like the common thing around cities and towns?
Yes and no, because in Poland there are many cities that I like to call urban. Urban, I mean, that were before modernist urbanism, that are traditional with market squares, really nice streets, and also you can see that in Warsaw, especially with the old town and everything. You can see that in Krakow, you can see that in Wrocław, in Łódź, in every actually big city. But of course, there are smaller cities with traditional urbanism as well, but they were built before the communist era, we could say. But yes, in Poland, we've got a lot of huge arteries that were built in the communist era. A lot of blocks of flats. My whole city was built in the communist era. It was actually the concept coming from the communist. It was designed in 50s and it was built from 50s to like 80s. So you can imagine that. You can see that in Google Maps easily how the city looks. So there is no point for me to explain every detail. But yes, Poland is. I say that Poland is actually one leg still in the communist era, which is used to get everything for free. Of course, I say that it's for free, like it's a socialist economy. But the second leg wants to be free and live in a liberal and liberal country. There are no boundaries or anything. So Poland is actually torn between, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. And then maybe just linking onto that, what you're just saying, how do people react like with these proposed changes that you're mentioning, the projects you're doing? Are people in favor of them? Are they against them? How does that kind of play out?
There are so many people that are against narrowing any street. Even if you narrow just a car lane, like a half meter, you make it a half meter more narrow, only to make it more safe or get the space for greenery or something else. People will protest, and that's something that we still cannot understand in Poland because car has always been. In Poland, a car has always been a symbol of freedom, and it's something that's stuck in our culture really hard, really, really deep in our culture. Of course, it changes because once people see the changes, for example, if we close a street, there are so many protesters against it. But once we close it and the street turns out to be a really nice public space and people see that it thrives with life, with people want to spend time there, then they forget that there was a road for cars earlier. And in Tychy, we also have an example of a square. It's a very important space right now because it plays a role of a current city center in my city. It's called Baczyńskiego Square. It used to be a square for cars with a road across the square with parking spaces. And 10 years ago, it was closed for traffic. And now nobody remembers that there used to be cars there. Now this is the most popular square in my city where people want to meet, want to play, want to spend time there, want to drink beer, etc., etc. Nobody remembers that it was open for cars. But of course, there's still this conversation that there are not enough parking spaces, so nobody can get to that square because there are no parking spots. But at the same time, if we wanted to make more car parking spaces, we wouldn't have a square there. So it's something that always will have someone against and for. But yes, this is a very difficult and challenging role because I'm already used to reading comments on Facebook that I'm a pest in the city or other stuff like that. But I can see how much good we did with our traffic engineers in our cities to make the city more safe, especially. This is the most important to us. But I know it's changing the mindset of people in the city as well. Because if we show them that it can work and it can be better for everyone, if they see that building a new bike lane instead of this too oversized car lane, and they will use this bike lane, they will say, wow, finally we have a bike lane here. We didn't have this before. And they will use it and they will learn. And I think it's a process in every society. Every society has to make the same mistakes. Some make it quicker, some need more time to go over it. But I think we cannot just jump into Amsterdam thinking, you know what I mean? It's a process.
Michał, I would like to ask you a question. As we hope, as we hope that this series will reach the computers of people in cities across the world, well, people across the world, but also people working in municipal capacity. Because as we know, you can be working at a city and championing walkability, but be really alone also in your team and not have even your own colleagues supporting you. So I really wonder what you would say, what thoughts, advice, inspiration, or even difficult advice for difficult moments for people who are working in cities and do champion walkability, but are up against so much public opposition or even opposition within their own cities. What advice do you have?
They have to be a really good diplomats. I would say even politicians, because wisdom and knowledge is one thing, and we can have experts in a field, but nobody will listen to them. We can have hundreds of scientists, experts, specialists in some field, and only one person who will have like a political power, if I can call it like that, and they will just say, no, I don't agree with them. And this voice is stronger than those hundreds of scientists. So I think the best advice I can say is making alliances with people with power in the local government, making adjusting the ideas to the people who you talk to. Like I said, I wouldn't convince the mayor with trees and wider sidewalk, but I convinced him that it will be cheaper to narrow a car lane. So everyone needs a different reason to listen, if you know what I mean. If you talk to traffic engineer, they will hope that you speak their language of technical issues. But when you talk to, for example, a mother with a child, you need to use different words, different carrots. You know, you need a carrot and a stick. So you need to use a different carrots for different people, and that's the most challenging part of making a change in a city, to be so flexible among different people, because it's very frustrating and you can really easily give up on some ideas only to not to make enemies, only to make people happy, because some people will be happy if you don't give them more work. For example, if traffic engineers come up with an idea for a street, you cannot say that it's a wrong street because they will be upset. So you have to somehow manage to talk to them and convince them to make some changes, and it's a really difficult job to do. So not only the ideas, not only knowledge of how streets, how space, how other things should work, but especially those skills, those social skills, if it's a good word for it. Yeah, I think that's the most important skill here.
Well, I would like to ask if anybody has questions. I see we have, I just want to mention, we do have, of course, Alan from who's in London right now. We have other participants, Corey in Philadelphia, somebody else working for a city. Merva is in Istanbul. We have Mohammed also in Isfahan, Iran. So we have a really nice geographic spread here. Folks, if you have questions, please feel free.
Thank you for your presentation. I may have missed, but I want to ask, what is the situation in the older parts of the city, or if you have any older parts, like old construction, or the historical part of the city? How is it? Like, what are the challenges, if you have experienced, to make any changes in those smaller streets, or yeah.
Yes, I understand. Thank you for this question, and that is something that is the most. I think it is the most interesting part of my city, because my city doesn't have a historical fabric. It is a new city that was designed holistically in the 50s as a new city that was to be. It's called the degglomeration of the cities that used to be overpopulated in my region, damaged by industry that was really bad in those times, because my region is a mining region. So my city was an idea of making a new, healthy, really sanitary city in my region. And of course, the whole city doesn't look the same in the whole borders, but there is no this historical fabric. But you can see that there are different districts as in the city that were built as first districts, and were way different than the districts that were built in 70s and 80s, because the early districts still have a little bit of traditional urban planning. Annika, do we have time to open? I can open Google Maps and show
Yeah, sure.
on my screen.
Yeah.
All right, just give me a moment. I will open the Google Maps, and it will be easier to show you than explain, because it's really interesting. It's actually one of the most interesting things about my city that we are proud of from an urban planning point of view. So let me just share my screen. Okay, so you can see Poland here. This is those are the borders of Poland. You can see that this is Katowice, the largest city in the region, the regional city capital, and this is my city, Tychy. And Tychy was designed like you can say nowadays we would say transit-oriented development, because the first district that was designed and built was the district A. That is another interesting part that we have districts called A, B, C, D, etc. So this is the district A. It was the first one. It was designed and built in in 50s, in the early 50s. It was finished in early 50s, and we have the train station here. So it was meant for people to easily get on a train and go to a mine or any other industrial part of the region. So this was the first district, but all other districts were built towards south over here. So you can see that the district B still looks like a traditional with traditional urban planning, with streets and buildings facing the streets, with semi public squares, spaces between buildings. And this is the Baczyńskiego Square that I told you about. There used to be a road dividing the square with parking spaces everywhere. So now this is the most popular square in my city right now. So we have more of a traditional urban fabric here. But when you go more into the south, the buildings get more sprawled. You can see that the buildings are just blocks of flats over here on this district D. And this is the place, the location of the city center that has never been built. But this is a presentation for another time. But I think it will be interesting.
Yes, I think I could see the differences. I also want to ask, so Katowice is an older city compared to your city, is it?
Yes, Katowice is older, but it's still not like a very old city. But you can see we're in Katowice right now in the screen. You can see that Katowice has a lot of historical fabric over here.
Yeah,
It's a historical fabric. But at
because
the same time,
I visited Katowice, that's why I want to
oh,
like
I see.
know a little bit like to compare it. Okay.
Yes, but Katowice at the same time is still a young city. It has historical fabric, but still they have blocks of flats like this, for example, and this. But it's a regional capital, so it's developing really, really nicely,
Yes.
I think.
Thank you for explaining as well.
Thank you for the
Thank you.
question, Mer. Mohammed, you said that that district doesn't look like the Soviet Union era. I'm sorry, I didn't follow the chat, so I didn't know in which part we were looking at, but was it the district A?
I was talking about the yes, the district A of the
Yes,
city.
exactly. Yes, that's correct,
Yeah.
because it was the
It
early
like
Soviet era.
yeah, it was modernized. Yeah.
Yeah, in the early Soviet Union era, it was a mix of traditional urban planning and modernist urbanism, because the country didn't really have money for big developments in 50s. The big developments started in 60s and 70s. This is why the fabric looks better, and it's called socialist modernist.
Is there like what would be your observation like if you compare the A, B, C planning differences in means of like mobility? How which one is more flexible when you're planning now, like in the current time? which one gives you more space? Which one has created more, flexibility for designing for the current situation?
Thank you for that question. We think that the early districts are more human oriented. The District B has been thought as the city center right now because it's more flexible for the functions to change. For example, the bottom floors are easier to be converted from flats into commercial spaces, so they facilitate streets with the services, and at the same time they make the streets more human oriented, and people stop thinking about the streets as only for cars. If they have, for example, tables with chairs to sit. So yes, the first districts are better for people. They're more people oriented, and the Baczyńskiego Square is the best example of that, and is the best answer to your question, because the first districts have streets and squares that can be turned into public spaces, but the younger districts with blocks of flats don't really have traditional spaces that are, for example, limited by buildings. So there is no identity in the space, if you know what I mean. People don't identify with it. They're just not valuable spaces to anyone. So people think about it as wasted land, no man lands, where they can just park their cars on greenery and nobody cares because they can't see any value there, if you know what I mean. So the first districts are of course better, more flexible, even if they were for cars 10 years ago. Now they can be for people, and the best I think the best example of that is Paris, because Paris has been really car oriented for decades, and nowadays we can see how it changes toward people and towards bikes, and it really goes well there, and we have the historical fabric there. We have another question for Mohammed. What factors affected the value of property? It is a general question. Let's not be specific for now. And that is a great question, actually, because it's the financial value of property in the Soviet Union era. The idea was that any district, any plot, everywhere should be the same value. There would be no better and worse flats. There would be no better or worse locations. Everything should be equal. Everyone should be equal. So every place you would live or work would be equal. So the city was designed that everything would be the same value. And of course, in a traditional city, we would have higher financial values of plots in the city center, and further away from a city center, we would have cheaper plots. In my city, the plots throughout the whole city, of course, the city that was designed in this modernist urbanism, everywhere are the same prices of plots and flats. But of course, if we sprawl further into single family, there are of course cheaper real estates. But the idea of the city when it was designed in the Soviet Union era, the idea of a Soviet city would be that everyone and everything would be at the same level, at the same value. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
Currently, like for instance, I'm recalling like Berlin, for instance, like the East and West, like they have different ways of planning the city. So for example, in East Berlin, the buildings have more like I guess they're more also like Soviet way of designing. And in the West, there is more modernism, if I remember correctly. So like, does it create any difference between those like ABC categories? Do people prefer one area more, or do they prefer the other or less, depending on some factors?
Yes, there is a difference when people think about the districts, because I think the key word here is the districts that were built in more modernist urbanism way. They don't really have identity. People say that everything looks exactly the same to them, and they don't really care about what it looks like, how it works, etc. And when they think about, for example, a city center where life thrives, where people meet, where people spend time, they think about the earlier districts where there is this square. This is why the square is the most important in the city. But the example of Berlin is a great example, because, of course, Berlin is a European capital, so it will always develop really well, because that's the nature of huge cities, metropolis. But that the city was divided into East and West Berlin, there are a lot of differences from the urban planning view. But at the same time, thanks to that Berlin is a really old city. It wasn't built as a whole in a modernistic way. There are just some districts that were built in a modernistic way, and also many of them were already demolished. And while some of them are still left, they're not bad there. They're not making the city not working well, only make it more diverse, if you know what I mean. Just a block of flats is not bad itself, but when you make the whole city of blocks of flats, it makes the city not working so well. This is why I often compare cities to a forest. You have monofunctions. If you have monoculture, the forest will not be the real forest. It will be a monoculture. So if you have a monoculture in a city, for example, if the whole city is just a bedroom city, why would you call this a city? It's just a sleeping district for people to sleep and go into their cars and move to someplace else. And this is how modernist urbanism ideology was introduced. So people would live, sleep in one place, work somewhere else, and spend time somewhere else. And it was simple. This is why any ideology works, because it's simple. And cities are not simple organisms. This is why it's so difficult to get rid of this ideology, because as we are people and we prefer easy remedies for everything, easy explanations for everything, and this is why politicians chose this ideology to implement, because it's simple. I think that's the key to implement any idea, to make it as simple as possible, as catchy as possible, and not making it, even though cities and our ideas can be really difficult and very specific, we have to make it simple so politicians buy it. I think that's the key. to change our cities.
Thank you for a good answer.
Michal, I'm dropping in your two Instagram profiles, as well as I can drop in your LinkedIn profile as well. Michał is also, like all of us here, part of the Global Walkability Correspondence Network. Before we end, I first want to allow for any more questions, and then before we completely close out. I think your whole entire everything was really, really wonderful, and so much. Oh, great! Thank you for leaving that in. Yeah, your Linktree Urbanomista. But this challenge to cities about the value of space, it like cuts to the heart of so many issues. So I really am just really happy that we've kicked off this series. Corey's here. Corey, I often attribute to. I will actually attribute the genesis of this series to him. Corey is president and works at the city of Philadelphia, and there was something that he brought up at a previous session that dropped in this seed in my mind that I said, okay, we need to start this series. So it's all growing together, and my whole idea is that we just create this ecosystem of media about these challenges, and also bringing forth insight like yours, Michał, directly from city works and projects on how municipalities can re-envision the value of space. So I think this was really an incredible start to the series. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Annika. My only fear was that English is not my mother language, but I hope you understood me well.
Your English is wonderful. Don't worry, it was wonderful. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I tried my best, but at the same time, as you can imagine, every of those things that I presented could be a topic for a different presentation. This is why I made it a little bit chaotic, but I just wanted to make a small drop of everything to make an introduction that shows that even my role as a pedestrian officer is a complex one. From a point of view of an urbanist, because our job, our challenge, our key challenge even as a global correspondent network is really interdisciplinary, and it's a really complex one. There is no single profession that can solve those problems, because cities are really complex, and it's like a human organism. We have so many specialists, doctors for everything, and cities are the same. We cannot just say that architects will save our cities from every crisis, right?
Right. First, your English is fantastic. And also, yeah, the whole point of the network is interdisciplinary insight. And I think, as Alan dropped in the chat, I echo that. And I think anybody here would echo that it wasn't chaotic. But you are also talking to a lot of people who are really dialed into these issues, I think. But the idea is that also we record this and share it publicly. And as we all present know, it's just so multi-layered. So that's where the sense of chaos can be, but it's just complex, which you have multiple times referred to. So it's just continued learning experience for all of us.
Yes, exactly. And this is what I always keep in mind, talking about cities, about any of my projects. I keep in mind that I will talk to different professionals and also not professionals. So I always try to compare things to more familiar things, like a forest. And I will share it for the end. I would like to share just one thing with you, that when I did my PhD studies, I had to work with students and prepare classes and everything for the students, and I always introduced cities and space to them, starting with the forest. And the same way I always introduced the topic of space and cities to small children. So there is no much difference between professionals, grown-ups and children. If we use the correct words, the correct way of thinking, everyone will understand. And I think this is very important for us to make to communicate in the right words and explain the things that can be understandable by everyone, not only by professionals. And I'm happy that the presentation was enjoyed, that you liked it. I tried to make it a little more spontaneous, so it wouldn't be so much boring.
Yeah, it was really fantastic, and we look forward to your next presentation.
I'm looking forward to as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Michał, and we will stay tuned to continuation of this series until welcoming you back for a continued presentation on your work.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me, and thank you for listening, and great questions from you guys, and we're staying in touch.